them beholders. Wraiths. Giants. They call us snacks. So when those bastards come to claim your world, send their ass to hell. Straight to hell tonight!
The shard is calling.
The hardest part about getting a game off the ground is getting people to gather around and want it to be willed into existence. We're not short on ambition at the studio.
We're a small, very, very small studio. There's no red tape. I can come up with an idea on Saturday and on Monday put it in production.
Kevin, the lead designer, and myself, we were like, why not approach Wizards of the Coast to see if we could do a Dungeons & Dragons game? The response I got back from WotC was they just wanted to shut us down, basically. They didn't want us to make a Dungeons & Dragons game, but we wanted to make one. So we pivoted. We're not going to work on a pitch. We're going to make this game as if we're making this game, and let's just go, YOLO.
Since we didn't have that programming power from the start, instead of doing that stuff in pre-prod, we did what we shouldn't do, build as you go.
It's an extremely risky way to make games. But we were very passionate about the brand, so we just kept plowing forward.
Starting to work on a new project, especially when it's an IP that you're basically starting from scratch. This could be absolutely frightening. But in our case, we saw it as an amazing challenge.
We moved super fast, which is why we were able to come up with a game that has a lot of stuff in it.
At that point, it was a top-down action RPG. You would gather up with your friends, you would smash monsters, grab loot, and progress. But it was missing something. It wasn't taking the characters, taking the Forgotten Realms, and rendering them to the level of fidelity that I wanted as a player. But we were still happy with our progress. We were growing as a team. At GDC, we got 6 offers from 6 different publishers to publish the game. Everyone really wanted it. I've been making games for 20 years now. I had never been on the side of a pitch where everyone wants the game.
He'd been working for a year trying to get the gig, risking all his life, trying to get this project going.
Had a meeting with Wizards, and the response was like, well, it's still too small. It's not big enough. Take a different direction. I was just crushed. But there was something that I didn't know that was happening behind the scenes. So a little bit of time went by, and I had a heart-to-heart conversation on the phone with David. I'm like, come on, man, you gotta let us make this game. We really want to make it. Everyone wants in on it. Pick the publisher that you want us to work with. And so they decided, they said, you're not gonna work with any of those publishers. We're gonna publish it with you. From that day on, the game was greenlit, and we went forward with WotC as the publisher and us as the developer.
The team size, when I joined, it was about 11 people to now 60 plus people.
I just said, okay, I'm diving into it. I'm quitting my job. I'm joining you.
We need a diverse cast of characters to represent well the game that we want to make. If you're passionate about your craft, if you're passionate about making games, then that passion is going to come through in the game. But there was one condition when we got greenlit. We're going to double your budget and you're going to go bigger. So like, what are you going to do now that you got to make a bigger and better experience for Dungeons & Dragons? For 1 year, I had been chasing this dream of getting the green light to work on a D&D game, and I got the green light. It was one of the most awe-inspiring, emotionally charged moments of my life. And then it just hit me like a cold shower. Oh my God, we got to do this now.
What's cool about doing a D&D is that you're kind of inventing it as you go. No one's done a D&D game for a long time, so it opens up a lot of possibilities.
When I was first pitched the D&D game that we were gonna make, it was a top-down RPG.
Then we decided to go more action RPG, change the camera to a third-person camera.
It's such a huge undertaking, and it meant that we had to start over from everything that we had done up to that point.
But the third-person camera allows us a lot of cool flexibility with how we can see and perceive the world, but on the other hand, it adds a lot of level of complexity.
The biggest challenges that I had was managing all this content with such a small team.
It was a lot of pressure on the team, especially shifting focus meant as a programmer trying to come up with the brand new framework on top of Unreal to support this game.
We chose to go third person because we wanted a more intimate experience with the Forgotten Realms. We wanted to really get in there.
So we have to make sure that the animation quality is sustained with that type of camera in the gameplay.
The reason why we stayed third person, because we really wanted to see the characters come to life. We wanted to see them fully rendered, being real total warriors on the battlefield.
The game became more of a fighting game. Just to get more of that action vibe, it makes the game feel bigger.
You don't know why, but you're like, gameplay feels tight. I feel like I'm really fighting and it's intense. You don't know that it's necessarily the camera and the way it's placed and the way it moves, but that's what it does.
There's so much to cover in D&D, it's basically limitless, the amount of permutations that D&D can take. So it would have been impossible for us to try and cover it all.
When you have to take on something that's this big, it's so easy to panic. There's too much stuff.
The piece of advice that we got from the folks at Wizard that was really liberating for us was to make it our own. To be super specific in the way that we're building these characters, the way that we're building the monsters, the way we're building the game, and be true to our creative vision for what we're trying to build.
We tried sticking to what D&D has, but adding our metal twist to it, and it was super fun to do.
The way we make our game ownable in the universe of D&D, I will say, is with all of our little attention to details that we add. Those are really personal to the artists that are working on this game.
As a gamer myself, I try to put myself in the shoes of the players who's gonna play this game and decide whether or not this is an important thing for them.
Everyone feels like they have ownership of D&D, and everyone feels like their way is the right way. And the reality of all that is that everyone's right. There's no real wrong way to play D&D. There's no wrong way to interpret D&D, and that's the beauty of it.
We wanted to have story, we wanted to have combat, we wanted to have everything, but we didn't have the time or the manpower.
The challenge was, what do we do? Do we build a more linear narrative story, or do we focus on action and throwing down with monsters? We went back and forth as a team. I guess I can do what I do with the team and just play the game a bit. It was really a struggle because we had this game that was being built out from a story standpoint, but we're making a co-op game and the pace of play needs to be kept really high. We want the adrenaline to be pumping for players, and having those beats of downtime too frequently kind of took players out of that adrenaline rush for the game. At a point in production, we looked at what we had, we looked at the game, and some of the parts of the game that were really standing out were the combat. We use the term emergent combat to describe the way that combat flows in the game, where you're choosing at any given moment to be moving, dodging, or blocking or parrying. And by performing those actions, the combat will emerge into really spectacular choreographies of offense and defense. We really wanted to lean into giving players that free-flowing expression of combat and getting into the rhythm, and we had to make a choice of where to dedicate our efforts and time and energy because we're a relatively small team, and to do a good job at that, we really needed to focus.
We knew just making a fighting game work is already a huge challenge, especially with 4 different characters that you can play and a bunch of different size monsters that go from 30 feet to 5 feet. So that was already a big piece to try to figure out. So we sort of decided, let's go all our efforts into combat.
I worry that we chose to go down the path of combat. I'm still worried about it. I don't know if players are gonna get into it like I get into it and like the rest of the team gets into it.
It's the exciting part. The combat is when, am I gonna die or not? And it's definitely where everybody gets into the moment.
One of the things that stood out in the books of R.A. Salvatore was how choreographed each of the fight scenes with Drizzt and the companions was. We felt we needed to do that justice and give players a really deep and articulated moveset so that they can express the breadth of combat the way that we envisioned it from the books.
It was a great feeling to find out that we're making an action RPG. My background is heavily in combat, even as a programmer. I was very excited to hear that we're making quite a combat-heavy game.
I could see that there was a great variety of monsters and characters that we could play with to have a combat that's distinct and unique. So that's basically why I wanted to join team.
When I found out that the game was going to be more combat action RPG, for me, it was just exciting to know there would be a lot of monsters to rig. It's super fun to go with friends and tackle different type of enemies.
It gives our game a cool flavor that we're showcasing on the enemies. Here's who you're going to kill. Here's the world you're in.
We want to make the best game possible for players, and we want to make the Forgotten Realms super immersive. You want to go in there, you want to feel the harshness of Icewind Dale, you want to feel how dangerous these monsters are. Our game is about the part of D&D when the Dungeon Master says roll for initiative, and then you go at it with a bunch of goblins and giants and beholders and dragons. We're a spiritual successor to Dark Alliance 1 and 2. It's not a sequel. We don't continue the story's events. Dark Alliance is this Dark Alliance of monsters that are descending upon Icewind Dale to claim this powerful artifact for themselves and turn the tide of the Blood War. But also it is heavily focused on the action and visceral nature of Icewind Dale.
It's fun to be empowered by the hero's abilities, by their combat moves, and bashing these monsters and just trying to overcome the odds of many monsters versus a few companions. It's always fun.
D&D does have a lot of art, but if you look at the books, they're quite eclectic. There's all sorts of different artists and different styles. So it's easy to sort of find a place where you'd like to fit in and then build from that, you know?
I knew Stefan was doing something really edgy. Then that kind of brewed inside his head until he went to defend the artistic direction at Wizard of the Coast. And this is a big moment.
I was meeting some of the execs at Wizards of the Coast. And we had pinned up some artwork, and then one of the execs was trying to get me to explain the art direction in 2 words.
They were challenging us to say, what's your style? What are you doing that's different? How are you elevating Dungeons and Dragons? We were struggling to find a word to represent the harshness of Icewind Dale, the rituals that these monsters do to gain supernatural powers, the skulls and spikes, and the gritty atmosphere that Icewind Dale is in my mind.
So I'm looking at the images on the wall, and I'm going, well, we're heavy metal, man. And I remember Jeff looking at me for a moment, and then the exec went, yeah, we are heavy metal.
And it's not to say like heavy metal in the sense of, well, it's big rock music. It's more the style of metal. From there on, it became, okay, the game is metal, and we really embraced it.
Stefan has a lot of charisma. He can get people to just join him on stuff. I think that's what happens there. He was convinced from that moment, that's what we have. the metal artistic direction, which I entirely love, because that means you can do edgier monsters and edgier characters.
As we started building levels, we started creating monsters. They kind of unleashed themselves onto the game, and we just let it out, and it was a great decision.
That makes it exciting gameplay-wise.
The way that the game is built, each set of missions that you'll play has one showcased monster that is the baddie for that set of missions.
Let's say it's a Verbeeg mission. They took over the Dwarven Valley because they like to eat dwarves. Whereas cultists, they built these castles and they're worshippers, and it's a whole different vibe, right? So basing it on monsters helped us to give every mission its own vibe and its own look.
I think that's what I like about our monster. You can see clearly they don't blend into each other. They all have their different personalities, and it's super cool to see.
From the magic of 7 liches, the crystal shard lay forgotten beneath the snows of Icewind Dale for thousands of years.
The Crystal Shard is one of the most popular books in the D&D universe.
Drizzt, he's the reason why I chose this setting. Growing up, reading the books that R.A. Salvatore wrote about his adventures and his companions. I read them when I was really young, and then reread them researching for the game and leading up to making this game. Okay, recording.
What was it like to actually meet R.A.?
The first time I met R.A. Salvatore was totally unexpected. We're meeting with wizards, talking about potentially making the game, and just casually, one of the people that we were meeting with says, well, R.A.'s here, he's in the building, he's over there, let's see if we can go meet him. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Are we gonna go meet him? I'm trying to get this game, but he's here. I just kept repeating the same thing over and over in my head. Don't be starstruck, don't be starstruck, don't be starstruck. I didn't want him to see like that I was super impressed that he was there, because yeah, I was like, don't be starstruck. He was super friendly, super nice. I showed him early prototype of the game and he thought it was really cool. That was something else. The 4 characters in Dark Alliance are Drizzt Do'Urden, the Drow outcast, very legendary reputation in the world of the Forgotten Realms. Then you have Wulfgar, son of Beornagar, who is a 7-foot-tall barbarian. And you have Catti-brie, the ranged support archer character, and you have Bruenor Battlehammer, the father figure of them all.
Which character do I love most? Wow, it's like asking a dad whose child he prefers.
I'd be hard-pressed to not pick Drizzt, my boy.
I prefer to play Bruenor.
Bruenor's my favorite. I think he's a cool little dude.
Wulfgar was my favorite character.
My favorite hero was Wulfgar, then it changed to Drizzt, then it changed to Bruenor, and now I'm fairly certain it's now Catti-brie.
My favorite hero is Catti-brie. When we saw her design the first time, mostly every woman in the studio, we were really blown away. She's really badass. It's cool to see fantasy armor that way.
It was a nice challenge to fine-tune that balance and respecting the lore, at least getting inspiration from it, and delivering something that would be fitting perfectly for the type of game that we're creating.
We're true to the characters of the books, but we take and add a little bit of new to the characters that people can uncover and get behind as well. It's extremely liberating in a way that you don't have to abide by very strict guidelines, very strict rules. The D&D rule set is there as a framework for you to just have a fun time, to express yourself, to make it the way that you want to make it.